Trespassing in a Child's Head, Unwillingly, by Kitty Cat, on AO3. Chapter 18, Words to be Said. "And you promise this won't take too long?" Izuku's mom asked, bouncing her leg nervously. She had been called to the precinct as soon as school had ended, Eraserhead giving them both a ride. Nana was grateful for the distraction if she was being honest. The kids were coming far too close to the truth for her liking. The detective nodded, sighing. "I promise we will be as fast as we can, but it is crucial that we get this information as accurate as possible in order to find the girl's uncle," he explained. "And neither will face criminal charges," she double-checked. They were just trying to help, and if they get criminal charges placed against them, it would mess up their entire lives, and with Izuku and his new quirk, Midoriya, the detective said, resting his hand on hers. Nana raised an eyebrow and he quickly pulled his hand back. "They have no charges. All that's being asked is that they stay with the girl and retell their accounts of what happened. I will have them back to you shortly." Inko nodded, rubbing her eyes. She tapped her legs, smiling up at her. "I know it seems like a lot, but your kid is a strong one. He'll be back to normal soon. Everything will. It just takes some time to adjust," Nana told her. She nodded, laughing slightly as she wiped her face. "You really speak like a therapist, Seven," she chuckled, her voice breaking. "Just keep him safe when I can't, okay?" She nodded, standing up and following the detective from the room. She had done enough reports as a hero to know how this worked. She was just glad she had actually been the one awake when Izuku had snatched the girl. "Nao-sama," she called, and the man froze, looking over at her. "Sorry, detective," she corrected herself, coughing. "The girl. Eri, does she have somewhere to stay?" He nodded slowly, tucking his hands into his pockets. "She'll be staying with Eraserhead for the time being. UA is the safest place for her." "Maximum security on a child?" Nana double-checked. Izuku really got himself into some shit, didn't he? Nao-sama chuckled slightly, rubbing his eyes. "You don't know the half of it," he whispered, leading her into the first of 3 interrogation rooms she'd been in. 3 accounts, 3 stories. "First," Miss Midoriya said softly, shifting on the couch they were piled on. The quirk specialist had gone as well as they had all thought, meaning they hadn't really figured anything out. They had tried a bunch of different methods to get a quirk to show itself. Mostly it was just a bunch of bullcrap tests with intelligence or mind control. Yoichi shook his head, trying to clear it. He hadn't fronted in a while, but the kid had decided to send him out when it was more peaceful. "What is it?" he asked, shifting to look up at her. She rubbed at her hands, sighing. She took a deep breath. "Katsuki said something the other day, after they tried to take you, the kidnapper." "I know what you mean, Miss Midoriya. What do you want to know?" She bit her cheek, sighing as she rubbed at her neck. Why are you so eloquent? I still don't understand all this. Izuku wasn't around people like you when you appeared." She took a deep breath, shaking her head. Katsuki was right, wasn't he? It's why they couldn't find a new quirk. You are his quirk." Yoichi sighed, setting a hand on hers. She took it, holding it tightly as she glanced back at him. "That's not entirely true," he said quietly. He should have spoken to the others first, but ultimately he had the final choice. It was his quirk that got them all stuck together. "Can you explain it to me?" she whispered, holding his hand with both of hers. "I want to help him. I've tried so hard to understand, but every time I think I know what's happening, everything changes. I just want to help him." He sighed, nodding. "I understand your worries, but I'm afraid you won't like what I have to say about what we are to Izuku." She nodded, letting go of his hands. I want to help. I want to be able to understand what he's going through, and I know that you know what's happening. All of you do." She rubbed at her eyes, sighing. "Please," she begged. He nodded, taking a deep breath. He'd have to trust the others to keep Izuku distracted. "Izuku is still young. This isn't information I have told him yet. We've tried to keep it from him." "Why?" she asked. "When did all this happen?" He nodded, tapping his foot on his knee. "Your husband," he said quietly. She looked over at him quickly, her eyebrows twisted. Her face settled into a scowl as she huffed. "What about him?" she asked harshly. "He's dead. He doesn't have any effect on Izuku." "We come from him," he said softly. She gasped, shaking her head. No, I'm done with him." She looked back at him, her knee bouncing anxiously. "What do you know about him? How do you know more than Izuku? What does he know?" Nothing, he assured her. He knows nothing about his father. He believes him dead. He is dead, she said defensively, standing up. She paced in the room, rubbing at her neck repeatedly. As far as I care, he's dead. You know that you're just lying to yourself, Miss Midoriya. Stop, she said loudly. Don't call me that, please. Either call me Inko or Mom. I raised you as far as I know, just like my son. He stood up as well, taking her hand in his. I understand if you are upset. I'm not the best at explaining things. Before Izuku, there wasn't much to explain. So you have his quirk? She asked, turning to him. I don't even know what his quirk is. I never thought. He assured me. Can we sit down, Inko? First asked, taking her hand. I want to explain, but you need to calm down. She nodded, moving with him to the couch. You know who he is, she whispered, tightening her hold on his hand. I know that you watch him every day, keep up with all the reports. You still let Izuku love him as a hero. She nodded, wiping her eyes as she laughed. Pathetic, isn't it? That fell for someone like him. No, Yoichi said quickly. It isn't. You've done amazing. I can't explain his quirk to you. That was his decision. What I can say is that I know more than you think. We all do. And for Izuku's safety, we keep him in the dark. It's necessary right now. This hasn't... She sucked in a deep breath, shaking her head. You'll tell me, right? She whispered. When he's safe, you'll tell me everything, right? He hesitated and she sighed. Just keep him safe. Promise me that much. Keep him safe. He nodded. We will do everything we can to ensure his safety. No, she snapped. Promise me. I promise, he whispered, and she sighed, nodding. He jumped as she wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a hug. Thank you, she whispered, kissing the top of his head. He leaned into her touch, nodding. One day. Ah, Midori! Watanabe yelled, practically launching herself at Dai. He stepped back, grabbing the girl before she could fall forward, setting her back on her feet. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. Wow, Midori, you're really strong, she chuckled, holding his shoulders. Hirakori, the boy with the long ears, pulled her back, sighing. Nice to see you back. Everything all right? He hesitated, and another person slapped Hirakori on the wrist. Of course he's not all right. He's friends with the Hero Course kids. The dang villain attack got them all sorts of messed up. Oh, Watanabe said, wiggling free of Hirakori. That's right. You're friends with that loud one, the one who called us extras, aren't you? That, Dai said before sighing. Yeah, that sounds like him. What happened? Hirakori laughed, rubbing his neck. We may have been baiting them into a fight. Dai raised an eyebrow and he stammered, not like a real fight, but like a, I don't know. They get more money than our program, the other boy pointed out. I get that they're the main one, but we don't get any of the same things they do. The field trips or the special guests or anything. We're just a bit upset. Watanabe nodded, grabbing Dai's hand tightly. Yeah, though I don't want to be like them, she giggled. That attack was pretty scary. I don't think I would have been able to help much. You know who could have? Shinzo, all three said in unison, nodding. Dai frowned, looking over to an empty desk where the purple-haired boy usually sat. He hadn't given them much trouble, besides from constantly watching them. No matter what they said, the boy was convinced something was wrong. Which was more concerning about what that said for him. Hirakori sighed, taking Watanabe's hands off Dai again. You're trying for the hero course, aren't you? What? Dai said, looking back over as he shook his head. I already didn't make it. Didn't you know? Watanabe asked, jumping back into his face. If you win in the sports festival, you can get to the hero course. She went to grab his face, but he stepped back out of her reach, laughing. Good luck beating Shinzo, though, Hirakori said with a shiver. He's scary when he wants to be. Dai went to respond on the boy's behalf, but the door opened behind them, making him quickly move back. Midnight walked in, grinning over at them. What are we talking about today? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Watanabe grinned, bouncing over to her. Okay, so you know how in the sports festival we get to compete? She asked, following Midnight to her desk. The two boys dispersed, waving by as Dai stretched out his back. He turned, almost hitting Shinzo in the face with his elbow as he walked to his seat. The boy glared at him, his eye bags seemingly worse as he sat down. You're finally back, he said, raising an eyebrow. About fucking time. Dai laughed, nodding. You know, kid, you would get along amazingly with Katsuki. Shinso rolled his eyes, laying his head down on the desk. It didn't take long before Dai could swear he was already asleep. He'd have to talk to Inko about making some extra money. The kid had already been planning gifts for his class, and Shinso was top of the list. Dai had to admit, the kid did seem to need some energy drinks, though. "Hey, Kachan?" Izuku asked, looking over at him. He paused in his bite, raising an eyebrow. Kachan's friends were at another table with 1A, stopping by every once in a while. "Do you think that I'll ever manage my quirk?" he asked quietly. "I don't know what happened that day." Kachan groaned, swallowing what was in his mouth. "Have you talked to them yet?" Izuku sighed, tucking his legs up. "I don't know. It's weird. They're all avoiding me. It's like there's a barrier between us now, blocking my way to them. It's just, I'm so done with them." Kachan snorted, nodding. "They're idiots. But if anyone can figure it out, nerd, it's fucking you." Izuku laughed, rubbing his eyes. Did you talk to Nana?" he asked. "She mentioned you to Yoichi once." Katsuki went to speak before pausing, looking past him. Izuku frowned, turning around to come to face with All Might. He squealed, ducking down so he wasn't looking at the man anymore. "Ah, young Bakugou," he said, his voice booming in the cafeteria. Izuku could feel the eyes turn to them as he ducked down further, glancing up at his favorite hero. He looked so much more impressive up close, a smile on his face. "What do you want, All Might?" Kachan asked, nudging Izuku under the table. He shook his head, tucking his neck into his hands. "I'd like to speak with you, my boy," he said, laughing. Izuku's hands tightened on his lap as he glanced over at Kachan. His friend raised an eyebrow, flipping him off below the table. "Alone, if you don't mind," his hero added. Izuku stared up at him before looking back at Kachan. He shrugged, raising an eyebrow. "Why?" All Might coughed, laughing loudly. "My boy, I just have some things to talk to you about before your training. I don't think it pertains to..." He hesitated, glancing down at Izuku before looking back at Kachan. "Someone in the general studies class." Izuku frowned, looking down at his hands. He hadn't really thought his research. Clearly it was wrong. Maybe All Might didn't share something with him. Maybe it was all in his head. Kachan tapped his leg, raising an eyebrow. "I don't think." "I'll go," Izuku said quickly, nudging his friend back. "Bye, All Might," he whispered, slipping out around his hero. "Goodbye, Midoriya," he said, coughing. Izuku's hands tightened on his arms as he pushed himself forward. He shouldn't have expected anything more. He had gotten his hopes too high for his hero noticing him. He wanted to ask the man to sign his notebook, but he couldn't bring himself to turn back around, to see his hero talk to his friend. Kachan deserved it. He was his student. He turned the corner, out of the cafeteria, almost smacking into the principal. He jumped back, tightening his hands into fists. "Ah, Midoriya, my dear boy," he said with a laugh, glancing at his bald hands. "I was hoping to come retrieve you from your lunch." Izuku glanced back to see Kachan walking off with All Might. He whispered, his hands tightening until they turned white. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to..." "Please, follow me," Principal Nezu said, motioning him forward. Izuku followed, his steps feeling heavy as his mind raced. He couldn't do anything other than follow the principal to his office. He turned past where his office would be, though, instead leading Izuku into a small side room. It was a very small room, just a single computer and 2 chairs beside a desk. It was a very plain environment, and Izuku's nerves were on fire. "Where?" he whispered softly. The principal ignored him, pulling out both chairs. He sat in the one in front of the computer, waiting for Izuku to sit in the other. When Izuku sat, he grinned, clicking on the computer. "I do apologize for the strange location. However, I thought this would make you more comfortable. After all, I do know how authority can be hard to handle." Izuku swallowed but didn't say anything, nodding slightly. "I'd like to talk to you about your quirk." Izuku stared up at him with wide eyes, shaking his head. "I don't have one," he whispered, but the words sounded so wrong in his tongue. "Let's not beat around the bush, as the saying goes. I'm aware of your situation, however unique." Izuku shook his head quickly. "No, I don't. We haven't. The voices in your head. They aren't from dissociative identity disorder. They are, in fact, remnants of heroes from before you." He said it simply, as if Izuku's entire worldview wasn't breaking. He had been so careful. Sure, he had pushed what they wanted him to do, but he had been careful. He had listened. He opened his mouth to refute it before his head started pounding. He groaned, shutting his eyes tightly as the lights became too bright and hard to see. Midoriya? The principal asked, his words far away. Izuku tried to blink, but his eyes were too heavy and he couldn't think clearly. He could almost see the vestige plane behind his eyelids like static on an old TV. Yoichi's eyes appeared as he shook his head, trying to think, trying to speak. I don't have a quirk, Izuku finally managed to squeak out, and the pain dispersed. It left him panting for breath, his lungs hurting in his chest. The principal's black eyes studied him before his whiskers twitched and he smiled. I do apologize for pushing you that far, Midoriya. It was never my intention. He turned on the computer and Izuku nodded, blinking slowly. It seemed so distant, the pain he had just felt, almost as if it was never there. What are... he asked, glancing over to the screen. There was a file on the computer and Izuku frowned, catching a glimpse of the name. It looked oddly familiar, a strange combination of numbers and letters. He shook his head, focusing on the tab that appeared on the screen. His vision focused after a moment, a series of letters and numbers on the side, seemingly random. Since you would rather not discuss your not quirk, he tested it out and Izuku nodded. Then let's get into the basics of what I want to teach you. Izuku hesitated, the words and numbers foreign to him. What is... I'd like you to hack into UA's security system, he said with a chuckle, passing the mouse over to Izuku. Nana readjusted the paper over the toy in the pink gift bag, her hands tapping the bag. It rustled and she smiled, stepping back onto school grounds. Technically, school had been out for an hour already, but Izuku and Katsuki had been asked to come by to see Eri. He had let her switch out, which she was grateful for, despite the odd looks from her counterparts. Hey Nana, Katsuki said, and her gaze shot up to his. He kept speaking before she could correct him. What is the deal with you and the girl? I mean, Izuku wouldn't have gone out of his way to pick up a new toy. She shook her head, laughing slightly. Well, it's a bit difficult to explain, kid. She paused as they walked to the large dorm building situated in the back. How much do you know about who we are? Katsuki huffed, shrugging. He didn't stop walking, so she trailed behind. I know as much as Izuku. I know that you guys claim you're some fragments of old heroes that fucking... She couldn't help but note the way he said the word, putting it aside for later. All Might is one of you somehow, though you won't tell me jack shit. Because you don't need to know jack shit, she restated, rubbing her eyes. Look, do you believe it? He shrugged again, looking over at her. Why the fuck not? I've listened to you guys teach. I saw Izuku fight that guy in the alley. He couldn't have done any of that himself. So sure, let's say you are dead heroes. Vestiges, she corrected him, getting the same shrug. Anyways, we all had lives before this situation. I had a family at one point. Katsuki went to speak, but she continued. I was a hero. The safety of them came first. So yeah, I had a kid I never got to see grow up. So, this girl's a fucking surrogate kid to you? He asked, chuckling. She frowned, shaking her head. It's not... Look, it's more complicated than that. I don't care, Nana. He paused in front of the door. She smiled at him, pushing the long green hair out of her face. She took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Thank you, she said quietly, waiting for the door to open. It took a few moments before someone answered, their blonde hair a mess. Present Mike, if she wasn't wrong. She didn't do well in English, but that was whatever. We're here to see Eri, she explained, holding up the bag. He nodded, sighing as he opened the door more. Sorry, kids, it's He shook his head, yawning. It's been a day. You caught me in the middle of my nap. He was dressed in his hero costume, except for the mask part, which was tossed on the couch. I'll go get him. He turned to the hallway right as the door on the end opened, Midnight stepping out. No worries, Hizashi, she said with a laugh, leading Eri forward by the hand. Go ahead and fix your hair. Your shift is soon. He patted his hair before laughing and nodding. Hey, little listener, he waved to Eri, who hid behind Midnight as Present Mike passed. Midnight waved at them, her purple fuzzy sweater riding up slightly on her legs as she stretched. Hey, she paused, glancing down. Nana noticed what she was looking at and held up her wrist. Hey, Zevin, she said, rubbing her neck. Sorry, I'll get it eventually. Nana shrugged, kneeling down. Hey, Eri, she said, grinning at the girl. Her eyes got big, and Nana dropped the gift right as she charged her, wrapping her arms around. Zuzu, she said, her words muffled in Nana's dress. She laughed, ruffling the girl's hair as she stood up. Sorry for being late, she apologized, shifting the girl. I wanted to stop and get her something. Midnight raised an eyebrow, picking up the bag. It doesn't make noise, right? Most of us don't get enough sleep as it is. Nana laughed, shaking her head. Just a stuffed toy, don't worry. She shifted the girl to sit on her stomach, holding her out slightly. So what have you been up to, little Airy? She asked, grinning at the girl. Her eyes got big and she squirmed. Nana set her down and she raced down the hall and into the far room. You guys want some tea? I'm about to start some, Midnight offered. Sure, Katsuki said, walking over to the couch and flopping down. Nana followed behind Midnight, watching for Airy. Any more luck in locating her uncle? She asked, looking over her shoulder to the kitchen. Midnight paused mid-motion before shaking her head. No, she won't be going back anytime soon, she explained, not looking back. Kachan snorted. That's cryptid as hell. What, the girl criminal? Midnight paused, and Nana grabbed the pillow, chucking it at Katsuki's face. He failed to catch it, yelping as it hit him. What the fuck was that for? He asked, tossing the pillow back. She caught it easily, glaring at him. Use context clues, kid. It's probably an active case, she hissed. Midnight either didn't hear them or just chose not to respond, working on the tea. Well, how the fuck would I? Katsuki started before Nana held a finger up in warning. Eri came barreling down the hall again, holding a bag of something. Night was showing me, she said, dropping them on the table. Though she seemed happy enough, Nana couldn't help but notice the way she didn't smile as she said it, or the way her shoulders were still tensed up, the bandages on her skin. She hadn't had any real damage under them, no scars or bruises. But when they had tried to take them off, she had fought them, saying only he could touch them. It made her stomach sick, almost as sick as the atrocious clothes she was wearing, bright pink and neon green matching outfit. She shook her head, looking over as Midnight handed her a cup. Azawa got them for her, Midnight explained. He has no fashion sense, but no one was going to tell him that. Nana nodded, holding the warm tea in her hands. So what is this? She asked Eri, who looked up as if seeing her for the first time. Oh, it's polish, she said, holding up a small pink bottle. Knight said it would make me look pretty. I don't know, Nana said with a chuckle. You're already pretty dang cute, but let's see. She sat down on the floor, setting the hot mug away from the girl. Want to paint my nails? Eri's eyes got big as she nodded. What color? Why don't you pick? Nana offered, setting her hands on the table. Eri studied the nail polish carefully, picking them up and putting them on Nana's hand before putting them back down. She didn't mumble under her breath, but her mouth moved slowly, her eyes tracking every option. Nana could see that Midnight's nails were a very messy red color, nail polish all over her cuticles and fingers. Eventually, Eri nodded, picking one up. It was a strange orange-pink color, clashing against the deep green in Nana's dress. This one, she determined, holding it up proudly. Katsuki snorted, and she shot him a look that quickly shut him up as he pulled out his phone. They had both gotten new ones after the incident, as well as smartwatches they hardly wore. Miss Bakugou had given them as presents. I think it's beautiful, Nana said, helping her open it. Eri's eyes crinkled, though she didn't smile. It was more like a painful grimace. It's pretty, she agreed, before getting to work on Nana's nails. To say it was bad was an understatement. Somehow, the table got more painted than Nana's fingers, the girl's hands shaking as she tried to get it perfect. She had to stop the bottle from spilling multiple times. When Eri finally finished, she nodded, putting the brush back down. Done, she said, satisfied. Nana blew on them, and Eri joined her, tapping them every once in a while. In the end, her fingers were a mess, the paint on her nails messed up with fingerprints. Still, she grinned, nodding. I love them, she declared, ruffling the girl's hair. She flinched slightly before leaning into her hand, nodding. They look great, Katsuki said, the sarcasm audible in his voice. Nana glared up at him, and Midnight looked up from her laptop, raising an eye. Before Katsuki could defend himself, Eri grabbed his hand. She pulled him down, though Nana knew Katsuki had to have let her, putting his hand on the table. She grabbed a bright yellow that complemented his orange-banded watch quite well. Your turn, she stated, grinning. Katsuki's eyes went big as he shook his head. Nah, kid, that's not for me, he said, moving to stand up. Nana reached over and smacked him on the back of the head, getting a snort from Midnight. I'm a boy, he tried to explain to Eri. She frowned, nodding. So is Zuzu. Why? She asked, tipping her head. Yeah, why, Katsuki? Nana asked, grinning. Why don't you explain why your masculinity stops you from getting your nails painted? Katsuki opened his mouth to argue before glancing up at the hero who looked down over her laptop. He sighed, putting his hand back on the table. "Make me beautiful," he said, nodding at the girl. She nodded in return, her face serious. "I will," she declared, getting to work. Nana waited until Katsuki started to zone out on the nails before pulling out her phone and snapping a photo. Katsuki's gaze shot over to her, his eyes wide. "Don't you fucking dare," he started, moving to grab it. Eri ripped his hand back at the same time Midnight flicked him on the head. "I'm not done," Eri stated, setting his hand back on the table. He groaned, rubbing his head where Midnight had flicked him. "What was that for?" he asked, glaring up at her. "Language," she reminded him, before returning to her work. He groaned, looking back at Nana, who was on her phone. "You better delete that photo, or I swear to God I will He paused. "I'll kill you," he said instead, Midnight snorting. Nana laughed, sitting back up in the chair. "I already sent it to the girls' group chat," she said, dangling the phone out. He growled and she laughed, turning the phone back to face her. The comments and emojis were already flooding in, the girls obsessing over Katsuki and his beautiful nails. It took another few moments before Eri finished blowing on Katsuki's hand. "Done," she said, clapping her hands tighter. Katsuki looked at them, his lip turning up slightly. "Do you like them?" Eri asked, sincerely. "Yeah, they look nice," Katsuki said, though his face told another story. So did the yellow stains, somehow, on his shirt. Eri nodded, putting all the nail polish back. "If you wash that off by tomorrow, you'll break her heart," Midnight said, as Eri took the bag back down the hall. "Clean up the edges, but don't wash them off," she warned. Nana nodded as Katsuki groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking at Nana. "I can make a quick snack," Midnight offered, standing up. "I still have more papers to grade, if you guys don't mind watching her while I do that." "Of course," Nana said quickly, ignoring Katsuki's middle finger. Eri raced back, staring up at Nana. She stared at her, and Nana smiled, leaning forward to stare deeper. After a minute, Eri hummed before tapping her nose. "You aren't Zuzu," she said, frowning. Nana blinked in surprise before shaking her head. "I'm not, but I do look like him," she explained. "My name's Seven." "Seven," Eri repeated. "I'm almost 7, she stated, before looking at the bag. Midnight glanced over her shoulder. "She wouldn't tell us her age," she said quietly as Eri messed with the bag. "I'll let Tsukayuchi know," she said, a small smile on her face. Eri pulled out the stuffed cat, looking at it with a frown. "What is it?" she asked, turning it around. "It's a toy," Nana explained, her heart breaking at the need to. "It's just for you to play with or sleep with." Eri frowned before nodding. "Whiskers," she said, before pulling it to her chest in a hug. She climbed up onto Nana's lap, wiggling into the space. "Mr. Whiskers," she whispered, messing with the paw. Nana kissed the top of her head, nodding. "Where's y'all's remote?" Katsuki asked, standing up. "Want to watch something?" He eventually found it, turning it on an MMA fight. Midnight gasped, rushing over before she paused, seeing Eri's face. Nana could see it too, as her eyes were stuck on the screen, transfixed on the movement of the fighters. She was almost, just almost, smiling. Okay, so a few points on this one. Yes, Inko knows that All Might is her husband. Like, that's not like a, big reveal thing. She knows All Might's her husband, and she knows he's not dead and everything, but she lets Izuku still, fanboy over All Might because, she doesn't want to ruin it for him, especially because, All Might's such a big thing, and if she, banned All Might, it would be a really weird thing in this world because he's such a big dude. This one was a really long chapter. I don't know if it'll come through when I edit it all together, but just recording it all took so much time. I love Eri. So I will never complain about it because she's what added so much to it. I just love her. So they were not told about Overhaul. That is a very specific thing because, their first years, they haven't even had the festival yet. There is no way they would be let on this case. So yeah, no, that's separate. Yes, they come watch Eri. Yes, they help out. No, they do not know anything about Overhaul, and they will not know anything about Overhaul for some time. The next chapter is chapter 19, Some Bruises Don't Heal.